Chris could hardly believe it at first. His sister was kidnapped. Then a total stranger had access to all of his data, who worked for an unknown company, asked for help with the post proposal to help him find Claire. This was shaping up to be one of the strangest, most stressful days of his life. He sighed. His arms were crossed behind his back against the wall as his serious, nervous, and irritated eyes stared at the man sitting in the kitchen chair. His guns were all on the counter, which Jill and Parker were leaning. After that incident with Lansdale, the man had proved to be a loyal companion. Sitting on the other side of the counter was Sherry, her head resting on her hands, alternating her gaze between anyone and a certain nervousness. The man was wearing black tactical clothing, similar to Navy SEALs, with a black tactical vest. However, he made a point on taking all the weapons he had. Considered to be the best marksman, this time both Stars and the BSAA knew the quality product when they saw one, and all those weapons were modified because such as the damage is possible. No wonder he went after biological weapons in particular. "Is that good enough for you, Redfield?" the masked man asked. His tone of his voice was neutral. Just that. Neutral was there was nothing behind it. And that was uncomfortable. "Not even close. Take it off," he replied, pointing his head to the one on the man's face, which just remained inexpressive. "Take off my mask?" he asked. "Exactly," Chris replied. "Negative." "Why, are you ugly?" Parker asked. "Quite the opposite," the agent replied, a hint of good humor in his voice. "Somehow I doubt it," Parker muttered. After shaking his head and sighing for the 1000th time that day, he took 2 steps closer towards the agent. "Enough of this bullshit. Why don't you tell me why you're sitting in my kitchen in the middle of the night?" Despite Chris's firm and serious voice, the agent simply leaned back against his chair, not looking away. "Wesker attacked my organization." Jill and Parker looked at each other, and Chris, for the most of his part, remained to stay the same, but his face showed surprise, even a slight shock. "He destroyed a lot of our equipment and some of our research. We'll be able to salvage a lot on the bright side, but we're no longer have the means to go after him. And considering that your group has the most reliable amongst this shitty government, it was the most logical choice." The ancient had his hands resting on his thighs, his eyes fixated on Chris, who was already feeling a little uncomfortable. Not even for the reason people would have, but for the feeling that he was going to be attacked at any moment. A certain kind of pressure that made his body full alert to the slightest movement of this man in front of him. The fact that he didn't even know that he was going to be attacked, or if he was going to be attacked at all. It was truly disturbing. "And why do you think that? Why do you think the BSAA will help?" Chris asked, pulling a chair out and sitting about 3 steps away from the man, his hand reaching for his knife on his waist. At the distance, a knife was much better than a gun. "Because we know where he's going." Chris ran his tongue across his teeth. "And hopefully in a few hours' time, we may know the location of the hideouts." The masked man leaned his left arm on the table. He looked quite comfortable. Chris clenched his fist tightly as he was acting too comfortable, almost as if he was trying to show that he didn't seem like a threat, or that he could get out of that situation any time if he wanted to. It was irritating, feeling the superiority very similar to that of Wesker. And considering everything that happened that day, Chris was about to say that he was about to reach the limit of his patience. "Right, but why talk about it here? Why not at the BSAA base?" Sherry asked, feeling her body tremble as the ancient locked eyes on her, about ready to only turn back to Chris. "Because I don't trust them. Or rather, I don't trust the part that Redfield doesn't have control." Jill arched an eyebrow at that, and Chris made a confused little face. "They're corrupt, Redfield. They do deals in the shadows, under your nose." "How do you know that?" Parker asked, his arms crossed in front of his chest. "I know a lot of things. I have to. Otherwise I wouldn't have helped you so many times. The details don't matter." They disagreed, but remained quiet. "And do you trust me?" Chris asked, his distrust present in his voice. "I trust you enough. Otherwise our dear friend Parker wouldn't be here, listening to our conversation," the agent replied, raising his hand to the man to mention a form of apology. Nothing personal, Parker, but you work for the horrible people. Lansdale wasn't the end of it. Parker opened his mouth. He wanted to ask some questions, in fact, that everyone there seemed to ask a lot of questions, but they decided to keep quiet. They had more important matters to deal with, and they knew that Chris's patience was very short, and at that moment it was even more so. Right. Where's Wesker now? Chris asked. The agent sighed slightly. Towards one of our facilities, the south that attacked our base. He and his little group, they should have arrived by now, but they won't exactly be a problem. Chris arched an eyebrow. Why? He asked. Because one of our agents is going to take care of it. Chris snorted in disdain. A brief laugh of debauchery escaped in his lips. Oh, and you think one of your agents is going to be able to take out Wesker all by himself? Do me a favor, you ignorant bastards. You have no idea what you're up against, apparently. Despite the mask, he could see the agent in front of him smiling. It showed it in his eyes. Ah, Redfield, so naive. We have his blood. We've developed something that will make him sick to speak. Better than what you've got. Chris's face turned serious instantly, and the agent seemed to smile even more. You know that as well? Jill asked. As surprised as Chris himself, said in response, the man simply held up his hands and shrugged, as if it were something trivial. Wesker must be eliminated as soon as possible, but at the moment there's not much we can do. We'll have to wait for my team to get in touch anyway. I think Redfield here has more pressing concerns, no? He turned his gaze to Chris, who leaned forward slightly and rested his elbows on his thighs. My sister Claire was kidnapped about 22 hours ago. I've already lost a considerable amount of time, and I'm not in the mood for any games. You better not try anything. No games, no bullshit secrets. You're going to tell me everything you know. Understand? He said seriously, and the agent merely crossed his arms and nodded slowly in response. Chris didn't even know if he was trying to provoke him or not. But whatever he was getting annoyed with him. As I said before, I have no idea who that was. It's not that I'm looking into your personal lives, he said, and Jill snorted in mild disdain. Gee, how polite of you. The agent ignored it. But I'll do what I can to help you. We do have the same goal here. The quicker we resolve this, the quicker you can be concertable, he continued. And what do? You said a lot of equipment, Chris said, still a little suspiciously. Can I borrow your laptop? He asked, and Chris just continued to stare at him for a few moments, the silence taking over. Do you know how I can help? Lend me the laptop, he insisted, and after Chris sighed in defeat, he turned to Sherry and pointed the bag in the corner of the kitchen. She stood up and walked over to the bag, and then walked over to them with Chris's laptop in her hands. Ghost nodded to the girl in thanks and pulled the laptop towards him. As soon as he turned it on, he reached up his mask and pulled out the small USB drive that was next to his right eye, plugging it into the laptop straight away. He glanced at Chris, noticing the look of surprise and annoyance that having been missed, but he simply ignored it. Ghost opened the backup case system and entered this code. The loading screen appeared. In a matter of seconds, he was connected to his personal team. Ghost, good to hear from you. The image of a woman appeared. She had bandages wrapped around her head, hiding her short hair. Her skin was dark, and she also had a scar on her face, from the side of her mouth just below her left eye, and one more on the cheek. Alaya, good to talk to you. What happened to Flint? He asked. The woman sighed slightly. Unfortunately, he died of his injuries. That was 40 minutes ago. Ghost bowed his head and sighed slightly. Again, he vowed the lives of his men. May he rest in peace then, he said a few moments. Look, Alaya, I need you to locate someone. Claire Redfield. She was kidnapped 22 hours ago at the hotel. He paused and looked on the information, and Alaya began to search his system. 79 of the system is operational. We've recovered a lot of her access, but I still need information to that. Ghost turned to Chris, who had been silent till then. In the meantime, Jill and Parker and Sherry approached. They were also watching quietly. What have you got, Redfield? He asked. Chris handed him the video of the hotel staff had given him, as well as the information he knew. Alaya began to do her job, hacking into all the systems, whether the private or public, listening to audio calls, phone calls, and radio conversations. It may take a while, but I'll find out. The van parked at the airport exactly 2:23, and then at 2:39, it got on a cargo plane. I'm tracing the identification plate, Elias said, and she worked as Ghost leaned back of his chair, his gaze turned towards Chris. Is that enough? He said, but he already knew the answer. Chris wouldn't trust him. Probably never, but he would try to kill him at the slightest suspicion. Well, he hoped that it would be bad for everyone if either of them died. What exactly do you do? Chris asked, taking the advantage of the short movement of waiting to quell someone from his doubts. She didn't tell you? He pointed at Sherry. Yes, but I know we have a chance to hear it from you, Ghost. What's your codename, isn't it? I do the same as you fought. I fight bioterrorism, he replied, crossing his arms. From what Sherry said, it's not like that, Chris argued, and Ghost sighed. Remember what I said, no secrets. If we work together, I have to know what you really are to be trusted. And the offer information I give you wasn't enough? He asked, and of course they didn't answer. Well, he wasn't expecting an answer anyway. Or our organization had access to any information where we can get in the world. Just like Wesker himself, our system allowed us to make the outbreaks almost immediately. We had a lot of lists of suspicion and bioterrorists monitoring some secret or shadow organizations. He began, looking at a few more pages of information that Elia just put on the screen. Our mission is to intervene these outbreaks before any other organization, whatever the national or international, we can get the information faster and more conveniently, something we are not able to do and waited for some time of confirmation. He cracked the bones of his neck. We're divided into teams. The Esponge team is responsible for getting the information on the outbreak and anything related to it. Whatever it's people, cities, intuitions, you get the idea. I'm in charge of the elimination team. As the time implies, I eliminated biological weapons and bioterrorists, he explained, running his eyes over everyone who just listened without interfering. What about the survivors? In some cases, by the medical teams arrive, they've all been vaccinated, Parker asked. In those questions, we know about the civilians couldn't retrieve the medical attention quickly enough. Our medical and cleaning teams were called in. They were instructed to act quickly, vaccinate everyone, give the medical treatment, food, water, while team up to get rid of the infected bodies. The whole operation took no more than a few hours. His eyes then focused on Sherry, who clenched her own fist tightly. Remember what I said? You can do the same to me too, Chris intervened, not liking the look he was giving her. I don't need to. She can say it for me, and it isn't the time, Ghost simply replied, looking at the computer once more. Right, but you have access to all the BSAA data, don't you? Chris asked erratically. You know the secret of our organization, of the government. Why don't you do something? Good question, Valentine. He rested his elbow on the thigh of his hand and to his knee. Simply because society isn't ready. When we decide on something, you can believe that I'm going to kill a lot of people. More than you know. People I know you, and the country will be chaos. After all, there will be no one to lead it. The BSA will lose power. He looked deep into her eyes, and Jill understood the pressure Sherry had mentioned before she felt when she looked into his eyes. Don't get me wrong, I'm going after them, all of them, but Wesker and Umbrella come first. Who knows, maybe they'll open their eyes and stop the corruption. Although I doubt it, he said, looking away from Jill on a laptop on the screen when he heard a small beep. I found identification. Fab A29F7301. Done. Bound for Stockholm. They arrived 13 hours ago. The van went to a private location, the land of the girl called Astrid, 10 hours ago. The private helicopter took off in the direction of Baltic Sea. I can't say exactly where, the woman said, and Chris stood up and he heard about the information. Ghost leaned his arm on the table and shook his head in confirmation. You did well, Elia. You did very well, thank you. I'm going to get ready to leave. I'll call you when the same radio is on channel. Elia nodded with a small smile. Any news about the Reaper? He got to the facility before Albert. He backed up all the files that he had to use to escape the submarines to send some of our equipment. Our team has already been sent to recover them. After that, he destroyed all the computers. He said he would wait for Wesker. I lost contact after that, she explained, and Ghost shook his head. Well, it'll have to do. Let's make it while it lasts. Talk to you later, Elia. He said goodbye, and then turned his system off and took the USB back. There's your confirmation, Redfield, he said, getting up from his chair to face the man. So, when do we leave? Two men stared at each other for moments. Chris was a few centimeters taller than Ghost, but he was bulkier, but he didn't seem any more intimidating. Jill, tell O'Brien we're leaving. That was all he said without turning to her, still with his eyes fixated on her. Parker, you're going with us? Sure, maybe he can answer a few questions with me on the way, the man said. I wouldn't count on it, Chris said. After backing a few steps away, he looked seriously at Sherry. The girl grimaced and sighed. You're not leaving me out of this, she began. And you know Claire would go after me if she were in my place. Chris didn't reply immediately. His eyes were still serious and his face impassive. After a few moments, however, he sighed in defeat. Yes, I know. You're very much alike. You will go, but you will do as I say. Are we clear? He asked. She nodded in confirmation, satisfied. Good, I'll get you your equipment ready. After Sherry walked away, he turned his gaze to Ghost. You can get your weapons, but I know I'll be watching. Ghost didn't reply, but just walked away to the counter to get his things, still under Chris's watchful eye. He was still suspicious, to be honest. He didn't know if he should continue like this. As far as he knew, that guy had helped Jill himself against Veltro and saved Sherry, not to mention the other stuff technically, but he was still a trustworthy guy if you look into those things into account. A frustrated sigh left his lips. This was complicated. He had to get to rescue his little sister, and he had the feeling that it wasn't going to be easy. Deep down, he wouldn't admit it, but he was in a huge favor with that guy. According to what Sherry said, and himself seen a few years ago, he would be a great ally to have. Hunk raised his hand over his mouth and placed the pill under his tongue. If something went wrong, instead of dying, he found himself in the hands of the enemy. He would swallow the pill and would be over in a matter of minutes. He quickly lowered his mask and put his back to the wall. He hidden in the ceiling. His legs were supporting his body on two pipes. His plan was quite simple. Eliminate the threats and infect Wesker. In the unlikely events that he didn't break into the facility himself, he would board the huge ship and had docked into the beach. No matter what they have managed to find Albert's location, that thing was undetectable. He watched from the security cameras as the man descended from the ship with huge gun bags and large boxes, probably to take all the equipment inside. They might even take the computers, but they wouldn't get anything. The elevator door opened and a large group entered the laboratory. Hunk looked down, noting the number of enemies. A group of 5, one walked in front of 2 others, carried a large box, and the rest guarded by the rear. He stayed there monitoring their movements for 10-20 minutes, an hour as he thought. Wesker had not come down with them. Soldiers were placed in the boxes next to the entrance of the laboratory that he was in. There were a lot of soldiers up at that moment. However, some were going back to the lab of what was left of it. This was his chance. He sighed and prepared himself, keeping his eyes fixated on the corridor below. As soon as the soldiers passed, he braced himself and quietly made his way down. He looked at both down the sides of the corridor and then began to follow the soldiers at a safe enough distance. There's not much left, just computer parts, he heard one of them say inside the offices. Hunk leaned slightly at the side and observed the situation. 2 of them were looking for something in the room, while the other 2 were putting some accessories and graphic cards in a huge box, which was already more than half full. Considering the weight of the accessories, CPUs, and monitors, the weight of the box itself, he would say it's the same weight of a more component person. Go check on the office next door before we leave. There's nothing left, he heard one of them say, and the 2 of them were watching and checking the office, turned and walked towards the door. Hunk quickly moved away and looked for a small hiding place. He scaled the wall to the ceiling again, taking advantage of the ventilation duct. It entered the office with his eyes camouflaged on the red of his gas mask, and he watched the soldiers below him intently. They looked up and looked around once more, to check to make sure they hadn't forgotten anything. "I think that's it," one of them spoke, placing both hands on the waist and taking a few more steps away from the box. "The parts will come in handy, but the rest of the equipment, we can't seem to find the system or get into those computers," the other said, his arm crossing his arms, also moving away from the box. Hunk pulled out a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. Outside the office, the emergency fire whistle blew, alerting the two men to quickly raise their weapons and walked out towards the noise. "See anything?" one of them asked, giving Hunk enough time to remove some of those things and put them back in the lockers. "No, just one of those idiots might have tripped over something. I don't know," the other said rather harshly, leaving the office and running around the ground. "I'll go turn it off." Hunk closed the locker door and reached for the box, shutting himself shortly and afterwards. The weight might be a little different than expected due to the equipment, but not enough for them to feel anything. Not to mention it was unlikely that they would simply leave some items behind, simply because of the weight. The soldier returned and everything fell silent. Hunk remained motionless with his body ready to fire at the unforeseen event. Despite this, he found himself waiting patiently. Minutes later, the other soldiers returned. "What was that noise?" he heard the soldier's voice muffled. "One of you idiots must have activated something while you were poking around," another said. "No, we didn't." "Oh, never mind. Let's just get it over with. Have you found anything?" The soldier interrupted him, and they approached the office. "Nothing. We can go. Tell the boss that they somehow knew we were coming here. They must have deleted everything." He heard the muffled voice, and shortly afterwards footsteps were approaching. Hunk then felt his box being lifted, as well as some brief complaints, but soon felt himself moving. They went up the elevator and walked towards the beach. They announced to the others that they'd be taking some things inside. It was time to leave, and all Hunk had to do was wait. They took a look at the things inside the ship, and they heard him tell to take the objects to room C2, in the lower parts of the ship. He waited 10, 20, an hour and a half, an hour and 40. He took a smaller object to the barrel of the gun, the trigger to his tactical vest, and placed it on top at the bottom of the lid of the box, and for about 4 seconds, the lid made a muffled noise, similar to a small explosion, and Hunk slid the lid aside, quickly checking the inside of the room before his rifle was raised. There was no one in that room that was dark. His mask had scanned as the red lenses changed to a greenish tint, making it easier to see in the dark. When the scan he had finished, he had moved when he saw that the air wasn't poisonous, but there were traces of sleeping gas in the air, not in a quantity large enough to put someone to sleep, but hours ago it was exactly the reason used for that room. The room was full of stolen items from the base, so he quickly moved away from the boxes and approached the door. From his tactical vest, he took out a small spy camera and bent down, slipping the camera under the box. He then pulled up the sleeve of his tactical jacket and looked at the screen of his watch. He also served the control and spy camera. It was a long corridor. In front of the house, however, it was a ramp that led up to the upper floors. To the right there was no one. To the left there was a soldier approaching with the rifle in his hands. From the distance, 10-11 seconds until he approached. There were no cameras around, at least, not that he could see. Hunk pulled out a small camera and put it back in his vest at the same time as he pulled the back of the sleeve of his jacket. He pulled the equipment what disabled any electronic devices nearby, as long as they were in range. He picked up the same device before and did the same as he had done with the lid of the box and was soon standing next to the door. 4 seconds now. 3, 2, 1. Hunk opened the door at the same time as he grabbed his machete. He quickly pulled the soldier towards him, put his hand over his mouth so he wouldn't scream, and quickly killed him with his machete. He pulled the soldier closer into the room and quickly closed the door, watching the cameras above the door that were now deactivated. He quickly turned around and began to climb the huge ramp. Before he got all the way to the top, he put his back towards the wall when he saw that the area that he entered was an open. Behind him was the back of the ship. There was a narrow corridor that led what looked like a place where they put containers. In front of him were some paths that led up to the ship. Hunk moved quickly towards the nearest cover, and the part of it was only an open air part. He saw a path that he could use to go up for another floor or so, considering the upper part of the ship was the same smallest that had the similar appearances of the dome. He would say that this was an important place. A control room, he was guessing, given the ship was nothing like the conventional one. His mask picked up with sound waves nearby, footsteps approaching from his left and behind him. There were also the same footsteps 13 meters upstairs. Putting the rifle on his back, he turns to the side of the ship, takes a hold of the railing, and jumps to the upper deck. He grabs onto the gasps and pulled his body up with ease. The Reaper looks down and watches the soldiers walk below him for a few moments. It was night, and he hoped that his camouflage would be better not to stay there any longer. He shifted his gaze 2 meters now. He quickly pulled his body up. He leapt over the railing and plunged his machete into the first soldier's neck. He then grabbed his silenced pistol and shot the second. The Reaper took 2 steps away from the bodies and ran his eyes around. He entered the ship again, and as he did so, he realized that he had reached the soldier's resting place. It was a long corridor with several rooms to the sides. He quickly walked down the corridor, but soon stopped when he saw a sign above the stairwell. There was an elevator next to it. He shifted his gaze. He pressed a button and waited, his eyes fixated on the closed door. He would see in the sound waves in his mask if anyone approached. As soon as the doors opened, he entered the elevator and climbed up the elevator shaft, leaving a small grate open. Quickly he began to climb upwards. However, as he climbed, he looked down to see the waves were entering the elevator. 2 soldiers silent but climbing. Not soldiers. One of them was a soldier, and the other seemed to be a part of the scientists there. Hunk clicked his tongue slightly and braced himself as the elevator approached. He let him stay on the ceiling. He was silent as everything he did, no matter what it was. The soldier would never see or hear him. The cameras wouldn't catch him. Perfect for assassination. That's why they called him the Grim Reaper. The 2 men walked down towards the corridor, stopped in front of the double door, pressing a button to the side. They waited until the board turned green and the doors opened. "Mr. Wesker," one of them said, standing 10 paces away from the chair he was in. "We did as you asked, but as we fought, they deleted everything. We got nothing, and some of the hardware was burnt out." Wesker sighed slightly, resting his arm on one of the arms of the chair. He was silent for a few moments. "What about the research?" he asked, breaking the awkward silence. "Yes, we sent it to your files. We are experimenting with Agent 06. It has something to do with the G-virus," the scientist said, and Wesker grunted slightly. "Good, you did well. As soon as I have read what you sent me, I'll give you your new orders," Albert said, and after the 2 men said "excuse me," they left the office. Wesker opened the file he had begun to read. Agent 6. It had said the quantity of the G-virus turned to his body, but it couldn't act on him. Well, that would be possible. After years of experimenting with the viruses, any amount, no matter how small, would be enough to mutate a person. There was also said that the body was stronger, more resistant, a natural resistance. That caught Wesker's attention. That was rare, 1 in a billion practically. His curiosity was that Agent 06 only grew, and that he only discovered that it was the agent that with the skull mask, Ghost. "Well, that's interesting. Looks like your friend wasn't a very good agent," he said out loud, cocking his head to one side as Hunk slowly descended from the ceiling. "William had his hands on something so special for all this time. No wonder why my plans were thwarted." "Maybe it was because you were so arrogant," Hunk said, his hands firmly gripping the rifle. He knew that he wouldn't be much help. He fought William a few times, so he more or less had an idea what he was up against. "I'll admit you guys did a lot better than I thought you would," Wesker said, standing up and turning towards Hunk. "But foolish to face me alone." "You'll soon regret underestimating me," Hunk said, raising his rifle and firing at Wesker, who moved to the side, dodging the shots. It was exactly the way Hunk predicted, practically teleported. leaving behind an empty air pocket, creating a small sonic boom. It was the thing to only heard about such things, but quite another to see with your own eyes. This was meant that this man could move faster than the eye could see. However, while shooting, Hunk noticed that he was teleported the same distances, only changing the trajectory. In other words, perhaps he could teleport a limited distance. Otherwise, he would have already attacked him instead of dodging his shots. Wesker got close enough and pushed Hunk's rifle aside, a move the Reaper as expected. He countered it with his machete. However, Wesker grabbed his fist and punched him in the stomach. Despite his tactical vest, Hunk could feel the force of that blow. Surely some of his ribs must have cracked. That's if they weren't broken. He was thrown backwards, and Wesker realized something as the Reaper fell to the ground. Looking down, he smiled slightly as the grenades flew at his feet, teleports backwards, covering his face from the explosion. Lifting his face again, he dodges the vertical attack from Hunk. The Reaper quickly attacked again, a punch to Wesker's face, but Wesker held his fist and countered a headbutt to Hunk's head, breaking the top of his mask. The agent grunted and tried to move away, but Wesker had his fist so tightly that he couldn't move. "You and William are going to make great subjects." Wesker dodged an eyebrow by forcing his torso backwards, countered with a punch to the stomach. However, to his surprise, Hunk dodged it by throwing his weapons and torso to the side and countered with another blow. Wesker dodged and tried to counterattack. However, Hunk was quicker and grabbed the pistol, firing it point blank at his opponent. Wesker's eyes widened slightly as he teleported backwards, doing 2 backflips as he continued to fire. Hunk raised his broken mask slightly and drank a herbal mixtures of herbs, throwing the flask to the side after. Wesker waited for him to attack, but as he lowered his head, he looked up in surprise to see 2 grenades stuck in his suit. The grenades exploded and a cloud of smoke formed, destroying some nearby equipment. Wesker reappeared shortly afterwards, not far from the explosion. He was without his top suit. "You're good," he said, as he saw Hunk attack him again. Wesker used every momentum of the agent's attacks to deflect his attacks and countered with a kick to his stomach, followed by a punch to his face sent the agent to his knees, leaving him disoriented. Wesker tried to attack him again, but Hunk dodged the blow and tried a low kick, which Wesker defiantly deflected. The agent got up and Albert attacked him, wanting to get it over with. He pulled his arm back and made a dash towards Hunk, fast enough to resemble his teleport, but slow enough that the agent will be able to dodge it. He realized that he and William had already mentioned it. Wesker still couldn't control it effectively. He still had a delay, something that was only a matter of milliseconds, but with the delay nevertheless, he could see the flaw. Hunk then countered with a kick to the side of Albert's torso, which he blocked by grabbing his leg. However, he took advantage of Wesker's hold of the leg and jumped up and turned his body, hitting Wesker with a kick to the face that sent him flying 2 steps. Hunk stood up and pressed the button onto the side of the broken mask. His ears were still protected, but Wesker's weren't so high-pitched noise spread throughout the room, sharp enough to reach almost 180 disciples. Albert grunted as he felt his hands to his ears, as he heightened his senses. Yes, but it could be very well against him. Hunk ran towards him and kicked him in the side of the torso, stepping to the side. He hit Albert with the face to the jab, followed by a punch to the stomach and an uppercut to the chin, and finally jumps up and spins his body, while still in the air, while hits a kick below Wesker's neck, sending the man crashing to the ground with a low thud. Quickly, Hunk took the syringe from his vest and stuck it in Wesker's neck, injecting the contents inside. Albert, for his part, roared in anger, and he stood up violently, landing a punch to punch Hunk's stomach, followed by an uppercut to a punch to his chest, strong enough to throw the agent across the room, until he hit the wall with his back. Hunk had spit out some blood and groaned in pain. However, a smile was on his lips. He had accomplished his mission, and now he had to get out of there. It would take a while for the liquid to act. There was no way of defeating him at the moment. Wesker looked at him angrily, and he gasped slightly, and had his hand to his neck, where Hunk had injected the substance. His eyes were as red as the gas mask, which was now broken. "What have you done?" Wesker said. That ignorance with superiority was no longer present in his voice, only seriousness and anger. Hunk chuckled slightly, leaning on the wall as he stood up. You've always considered yourself something much more than a human, haven't you? When you feel what it's like to be a part of the underdeveloped race, thank William for that, Hunk said, and Wesker growled in low anger, straightening his postures as he faced him. I made a mistake by underestimating you. I shouldn't have fooled around. A mistake won't happen like that again, he said, preparing to attack him now. Without holding back, it was possible that Hunk would die with just one of his blows. This will end, Wesker, yes. You'll see me again, and next time I won't be alone, Hunk said, showing Wesker a small controller in his hands, and Albert looked at him for confusion for a few moments, but was soon answered when the wall next to Hunk was destroyed by an explosion. He was taken by surprise and reflex. He covered his eyes. Falling debris hit his body hard. When he looked forward, Hunk was nowhere there. Wesker approached the hole in his wall with the now slow steps and an unfriendly expression. The other explosions followed, the other lower floors of the ship. Anger was built up in his chest, and he had closed his eyes and he smiled. Well, there was a chance that the system was still intact and his information is secure. Hopefully that damned human wouldn't have done too much damage. What an inconvenience. Hunk gasped heavily, feeling the salty taste of seawater mixed with his blood in his mouth. He was already far from the ship, so he wouldn't be able to see it over the horizon. His wounds hurt, even more because of the salt, but they were healing. Now he just had one more thing to do. His mask started to make contact with his team radio channel, but after a few moments he couldn't contact with anyone. Aw, come on, he muttered, trying once more, but still to no avail. With a grunt, he changed the channel and tried to connect again. This time it was pretty quick. Reaper, are you still alive in there? A small smile appeared on his lips when he heard Ghost's humorous voice. Lucky for you, yes. Well, just barely, he replied, noticing a fin nearby. Ah, great, now what? Ugh, damn, I was hoping I got rid of you, Hunk snorted. Oh, I admit it. You can't live without me, Ghost laughed on the other end. Well, who's in trouble? Me or you? You have a problem. Really? Yes, a problem with money. Do I? How? You don't let me any. They both chuckled a little. Okay, they can ignore that problem if they lend me a rescue helicopter. At the moment, I'm floating in the Pacific Ocean. Do you still have the ship? Yes. Do you see anything nearby? Yes, water. Wise guy, got it. I'll let my team know they'll find you. In the meantime, try and do something for fun. Oh, great, I think I'll swim with the sharks. Haha, go on, enjoy it. Ghost out. Ghost leaned his head back against the metal wall behind him and closed his eyes for a few moments, with still a slight smile on his lips. How's your partner? Sherry asked, a few meters away, making Ghost open his eyes again. Yeah, he'll be swimming with some sharks, he laughed a little when he saw her expression. He'll be fine. We're almost there, get ready, Chris said, moving away from the cockpit and sitting down next to Jill and Parker. The plane they were about to land, and Ghost looked out for the small window one more time before contacting his team. He had to help his partner.